3 digits unlocked a forgotten life. Christopher's weathered fingers trembled on the keypad, muscle memory betraying 15 years of careful anonymity. Security alarms wailed throughout the facility, boots pounding toward the restricted area where single dad entered 3 digits on a door. Soldiers flooded the corridor with weapons raised, then saluted. His teenage daughter would soon discover the father she knew was merely a shadow of the man he'd buried. One choice remained: reclaim his rank or keep running. Christopher Jenkins adjusted his security guard cap with practiced precision, the fluorescent lights of Fort Bragg's Research Complex B reflecting off his badge as he made his rounds through the sterile hallways. 15 years of vigilance had sharpened his awareness to a knife's edge, despite the mundane routine of checking doors, nodding at researchers, and logging entries in the security system. His weathered face, prematurely lined at 54, betrayed nothing of the calcified tension that had become his constant companion since the day he'd orchestrated his own demise. The weight of his service weapon against his hip was a familiar comfort, though it was nothing like the specialized equipment he'd once commanded with devastating efficiency in theaters of war across 3 continents. He allowed himself a thin smile as he thought of Rachel waiting at home, probably hunched over calculus homework with her headphones on, utterly unaware that her ordinary father was anything but. The night shift had settled into its quiet rhythm, researchers gradually filtering out until only the most dedicated remained, their faces ghostly in the glow of computer monitors as they pursued whatever classified projects the government deemed essential to national security. Christopher didn't need to know what they were working on. His job was simply to ensure that unauthorized personnel stayed out and that protocols were followed. He'd chosen this position carefully, close enough to keep tabs on military developments, yet insignificant enough to avoid scrutiny. The irony wasn't lost on him that he now guarded the very type of facilities he once had unrestricted access to, back when stars adorned his uniform and his orders could mobilize special forces anywhere in the world. Now, his greatest tactical challenge was coordinating his schedule to attend Rachel's volleyball games and parent-teacher conferences without arousing suspicion. The first indication that something was wrong came at 11:42 p.m. when Christopher noticed the research wing's southeast door slightly ajar, a breach of protocol so elementary it triggered immediate alarm in his mind. No researcher would leave a secure area unsecured, regardless of how trivial the contents might seem. Christopher's hand instinctively moved toward his sidearm as he approached, his footfalls deliberately silent as 15 years of security guard training fell away, replaced by the muscle memory of special operations that no amount of time could erase. Through the narrow opening, he detected movement, shadow against shadow, and the faint metallic click that only trained ears would recognize as a weapon being readied. Without conscious thought, Christopher's body shifted into a combat stance, weight balanced perfectly between both feet as he drew his weapon with practiced efficiency. "Security," he announced, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority that had once commanded elite soldiers, but now seemed oddly incongruous coming from a man in a rent-a-cop uniform. "Step out with your hands visible." The shadow hesitated, then resolved into the form of a man dressed in black tactical gear, face obscured by a mask that revealed only cold eyes that widened slightly at Christopher's stance. Recognition flashed between them, not of faces, but of training, and in that moment Christopher knew this was no common thief or industrial spy. The intruder moved with the deliberate precision of military training, and the weapon he held was not standard issue, but the kind of specialized equipment reserved for covert operations. Something deep in Christopher's core went cold. This was the moment he had prepared for and dreaded since the day he'd walked away from his former life. The confrontation lasted only seconds, but unfolded with the slow-motion clarity that Christopher remembered from combat, the intruder lunging toward a nearby door marked "Restricted Access." Christopher calculating trajectories and outcomes with the computational efficiency that had once made him legendary among his peers. He couldn't allow the intruder to access whatever lay beyond that door, but he also couldn't risk a firefight in a research facility potentially housing volatile materials. With decisive action, Christopher threw himself forward, intercepting the intruder with a precision takedown that belied his security guard cover. The man fought back with skilled ferocity, landing blows that would have incapacitated a normal opponent. But Christopher absorbed them with the resilience of someone who had endured far worse in theaters of war long forgotten by the public consciousness. As they grappled on the polished floor, alarms began to wail throughout the facility, motion sensors or security protocols finally registering the disturbance. The intruder's desperation intensified, driving him toward the restricted door with renewed determination. In the chaos of flashing lights and piercing alarms, Christopher saw the man reach for the keypad beside the reinforced door, fingers poised to enter a sequence. With one powerful lunge, Christopher knocked the intruder aside and found himself facing the keypad, its green display awaiting input. Without conscious thought, muscle memory took over as his fingers moved across the keypad, entering a 3-digit sequence that had once been seared into his mind as the emergency override for all special operations facilities. A code known only to the highest echelons of military command. The moment his finger pressed the final digit, Christopher realized his critical error. The facility transformed instantly as Christopher's code activated protocols dormant for 15 years. Red alert lights ceased their frantic flashing, replaced by a steady blue glow that bathed the corridor in ethereal light. The wailing alarms cut off mid-screech, supplanted by a calm, automated voice announcing, "Priority Alpha authentication confirmed. Stand by for command verification." The intruder, momentarily forgotten in the chaos of Christopher's mistake, seized the opportunity to escape, disappearing through a service entrance as the sound of multiple booted feet thundered toward their position. Christopher stood frozen, the security guard persona he'd cultivated for years now utterly useless as the consequences of his instinctive action cascaded around him. He had revealed himself, revealed the truth that he had sacrificed everything to conceal, all to prevent a security breach that now seemed trivial compared to the exposure of his identity. The first soldiers rounded the corner in standard breach formation, weapons raised and ready to neutralize any threat. Christopher recognized the tactical approach. He had, after all, helped develop it during his former life. Their eyes, initially hard with combat readiness, widened almost comically as they processed the sight before them. A middle-aged security guard standing alone in the blue light of a Priority Alpha authentication. The lead soldier faltered mid-stride, his training momentarily overridden by confusion until recognition dawned in his eyes. Without a word, he lowered his weapon and snapped to attention, right arm rising in a crisp salute that seemed to hang suspended in the surreal atmosphere. One by one, the other soldiers followed suit until the corridor was lined with saluting figures, their expressions a mixture of awe and disbelief. Christopher felt something ancient stir within him, the weight of command settling back onto shoulders that had spent 15 years trying to forget how naturally it once rested there. "Sir," the lead soldier finally spoke, his voice tight with restrained emotion. We thought you were dead." The simple statement carried the weight of years of misinformation, of ceremonies honoring a fallen hero, of classified reports detailing a tragic operation gone wrong. Christopher had attended his own memorial service, disguised and standing at the back of Arlington National Cemetery, watching as they buried an empty casket with full military honors, while Rachel, then just a baby, slept peacefully in her carrier, blissfully unaware that the father who held her was officially deceased. He had deemed it necessary then, the only way to protect her from the dangers that his knowledge and position had exposed them to. Now, as he stood beneath the steady blue light of exposed truth, That carefully constructed protection crumbled around him like a house of cards in a hurricane. The sound of more footsteps, heavier, more measured, echoed down the corridor, and the assembled soldiers parted to reveal a figure that sent a jolt of recognition through Christopher's chest. General Morrison moved with the same deliberate authority that Christopher remembered, though time had etched deeper lines around his eyes, and silver now dominated his once dark hair. His expression, initially set in the stern mask of command, faltered visibly when his gaze landed on Christopher. For a moment, the years fell away, and Christopher saw his old friend and confidant, the man who had stood beside him through countless crises, and who, unknowingly, had helped facilitate his disappearance by believing the carefully fabricated evidence of his death. Morrison's face cycled through shock, disbelief, anger, and finally settled into a complex mixture of relief and wariness as he approached Christopher with measured steps. "Jenkins," Morrison said, using the security guard name that Christopher had adopted, or should I say, General Alexander Pierce. The use of his real name sent a shudder through Christopher. 15 years since he had heard it spoken aloud, 15 years of responding to a different identity, 15 years of lies collapsing in an instant. Morrison's eyes never left his face, searching for confirmation, perhaps hoping that this was somehow a mistake, a coincidence of facial features and bearing. But Christopher knew there was no denying the truth now. The code he had entered was known only to 5 individuals in the entire military command structure, and 4 of them were confirmed dead. His identity was exposed, and with it, the carefully constructed safety he had built for Rachel. The weight of that realization crushed against his chest with physical force, making it difficult to breathe in the sterile facility air. Morrison dismissed the soldiers with a curt nod, waiting until they reluctantly retreated before speaking again. 15 years, Alex, he said quietly, dropping the formality of rank in favor of the familiarity they had once shared. 15 years we mourned you, we buried you. Your name is on the wall at the Pentagon. There was no accusation in his tone, only a profound bewilderment that mirrored Christopher's own internal chaos. How could he explain the choice he had made? How could anyone understand that walking away from his identity, his career, his friends had been the only option when weighed against the safety of his infant daughter? The conspiracy he had uncovered, reaching into the highest levels of military and government, had left him with no choice but to disappear, to become someone so mundane and unremarkable that those who had targeted him would never think to look twice. Rachel Jenkins tossed her backpack onto the kitchen counter with teenage carelessness, her phone already in hand as she scrolled through social media updates with practiced thumb movements. The house was quiet, as it always was when her dad worked the night shift at the research facility, a job she found painfully boring, but which he seemed to approach with the same methodical seriousness he brought to everything in life. She smiled slightly at the thought of her father meticulously checking doors and writing reports in his precise handwriting, so different from her own artistic scrawl that covered notebooks and sketch pads scattered throughout their modest home. At 16, Rachel had reached the age where she could appreciate her father's steady presence and unwavering support, even as she sometimes chafed against his overprotective tendencies and almost paranoid insistence on security protocols that none of her friends' parents seemed to share. The refrigerator was stocked with prepared meals, each labeled with heating instructions in her father's neat block letters. Another example of his almost military precision in handling household matters. Rachel selected one at random, not particularly hungry, but knowing her father would somehow divine whether she had eaten properly, despite working all night. That was one of the mysteries about Christopher Jenkins that Rachel had never quite solved. How he seemed to know everything that happened in their house, as if he had surveillance equipment monitoring her movements. She had joked about it once, suggesting he had hidden cameras installed and had been surprised by the flash of genuine alarm that crossed his face before he forced a laugh and dismissed the idea. It was one of many small moments that occasionally made Rachel wonder if there was more to her quiet, methodical father than he allowed the world to see. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call, the screen lighting up with her best friend Alyssa's name and a candid photo of them both making ridiculous faces at the camera. Rachel answered with the casual familiarity of teenagers who communicate constantly across multiple platforms, their conversation flowing between school gossip, upcoming assignments, and plans for the weekend. As they talked, Rachel wandered through the house, eventually settling in her father's small home office, where she idly spun in his chair while listening to Alyssa's detailed breakdown of calculus problems they were both struggling with. Her attention drifted to the neat stacks of papers on her father's desk, bills, work schedules, household inventories, all organized with the same methodical precision that characterized everything Christopher Jenkins did, from preparing meals to teaching Rachel self-defense moves that seemed excessive for a suburban teenage girl. As she spun lazily in the chair, Rachel's foot caught on something beneath the desk, a loose floorboard that shifted slightly under her weight. Curiosity piqued. She murmured non-committal responses to Alyssa's continued mathematical monologue while leaning down to investigate the anomaly in her father's otherwise perfectly maintained space. The board moved easily under gentle pressure, revealing a small cavity beneath the floor. Rachel's heartbeat quickened with the universal excitement of discovering something hidden, her mind racing with possibilities, emergency cash perhaps, or important documents. What she found instead was a small metal box, military-grade, and secured with a combination lock that seemed far more sophisticated than necessary for household storage. Ending the call with a hurried promise to text later, Rachel pulled the box from its hiding place, turning it over in her hands with a mixture of curiosity and unease. The lock yielded surprisingly easily to Rachel's attempt. The combination was her birthday, a sentimental choice that seemed at odds with her father's usual security consciousness. Inside, she found documents that made no sense at first glance. Military identification for someone named Alexander Pierce, photographs of a younger version of her father in uniform adorned with general stars, commendations signed by presidents, and most disturbingly, a death certificate for General Alexander Pierce dated 15 years earlier. Rachel's hands trembled as she spread the contents across the floor, her mind struggling to reconcile the evidence before her with the father she had known all her life. Was this some elaborate fantasy her father had constructed, or was Christopher Jenkins the fiction, a cover identity for a man who officially didn't exist? The questions multiplied as she discovered a sealed envelope addressed simply, "For Rachel, when the time comes." How with fingers that felt suddenly numb, Rachel broke the seal and unfolded pages filled with her father's familiar handwriting, though somehow more formal, more precise than the notes he left on the refrigerator. "Rachel," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then something has happened to compromise our security, or you have grown curious enough to find my contingency box." The straightforward acknowledgement of secrets sent a chill down her spine as she continued reading. "My real name is Alexander Pierce. I was once a general in the United States Army, commanding Special Operations Forces until I discovered something I was never meant to know. To protect you, to protect us both, I orchestrated my own death and created new identities for us. Everything I have done, every lie I have told, has been to keep you safe from people who would not hesitate to use you against me." The letter continued, detailing contingency plans, emergency contacts and resources hidden throughout the country, a paranoid's handbook for survival that seemed absurdly disconnected from their quiet suburban existence. Yet the precision of the details, the methodical thoroughness of the preparations, carried the unmistakable stamp of her father's personality. This was not delusion. This was Christopher Jenkins, or Alexander Pierce, operating as he always had, with meticulous attention to every possible outcome. Rachel felt the foundations of her reality shifting beneath her. memories realigning themselves with this new context. Her father's insistence on maintaining physical fitness, his extensive knowledge of weapons, despite claiming to have been a security guard all his life, his ability to treat injuries with professional competence, his vigilant awareness of surroundings that she had always attributed to parental overprotection. All of it suddenly made sense in a way that was both clarifying and terrifying. General Morrison led Christopher to a secure briefing room deep within the facility. The walk conducted in weighted silence as both men processed the implications of their unexpected reunion. The room was spartanly furnished, with a conference table, chairs, and state-of-the-art communication equipment, functionally identical to briefing rooms Christopher had commanded 15 years earlier, though the technology had advanced considerably. Morrison closed the door with a definitive click that echoed in the tense atmosphere, then turned to face Christopher with an expression caught between professional reserve and personal betrayal. The general's posture remained military straight, but his eyes revealed the human behind the uniform, a man who had mourned a friend only to discover that grief had been based on elaborate deception. Christopher recognized the conflict playing across Morrison's features because he had lived with a similar internal war for 15 years, balancing the necessity of his actions against their devastating emotional cost. "The code you entered," Morrison began, his voice carefully modulated to betray no emotion, "was decommissioned after your death. We created a new system, new protocols." He paused, studying Christopher's face with the intensity of someone searching for familiar landmarks in altered terrain. "Yet when you entered those 3 digits tonight, every system in this facility recognized your authority. That's because I never truly believed you were dead, Alex." The admission hung between them, a fragile bridge across 15 years of absence. "I couldn't bring myself to completely erase you from the system, despite direct orders. I told myself it was irrational sentimentality, but tonight proves my intuition was correct." Morrison's shoulders relaxed slightly, the rigid military bearing softening into something more human, more vulnerable. "What I don't understand is why. Why fake your death? Why abandon everything? Your career, your friends, your country?" Christopher weighed his response carefully, acutely aware that his answer would determine not only his future but Rachel's as well. For 15 years, he had carried the burden of knowledge alone, protecting her through ignorance. Now, with his identity exposed and the carefully constructed walls of their life beginning to crumble, he needed allies, and Morrison, despite the years and lies between them, was perhaps the only person he could trust with the complete truth. "I discovered something I wasn't meant to know," Christopher finally said, the words feeling inadequate for the magnitude of what he had uncovered. "Operation Shadowfall wasn't what we were told. It wasn't about neutralizing terrorist cells. It was about eliminating witnesses to something much worse. When I accessed the real mission files, I found connections to people so high up in our government that going through official channels would have been suicide." The revelation landed heavily in the sterile room, Morrison's expression darkening as the implications unfolded in his mind. "The operatives we lost on that mission," he began, connecting dots that had never quite aligned in official reports. Christopher nodded grimly, confirming the unspoken question. "They weren't killed by enemy forces. They were eliminated by our own people because they had seen too much." Christopher watched understanding dawn in Morrison's eyes, followed by the same horror he had felt upon making the discovery 15 years earlier. "I had a newborn daughter, John," he continued, the use of Morrison's first name bridging years of formal absence. "They already knew I had accessed those files. It was only a matter of time before they came for me, and Rachel would have been collateral damage, or worse, leverage. Faking my death was the only way to protect her." Morrison moved to the conference table, sinking heavily into a chair as the weight of Christopher's words settled around him. "And now?" he asked, the question encompassing the enormity of their situation. Christopher's exposed identity, the conspiracy that presumably still existed, the danger that had just been reawakened. Christopher remained standing, the security guard uniform he wore feeling increasingly incongruous as he slipped back into the strategic thinking patterns of his former rank. "Now I need to get to Rachel before they do," he replied, urgency threading through his voice. "My home has security measures, but they won't hold against a determined tactical team. She's alone, vulnerable, and has no idea why anyone would target her." The thought of Rachel discovering the truth through violence, rather than his careful explanation, sent cold dread coursing through Christopher's veins. Before Morrison could respond, the briefing room door opened to admit a young intelligence officer bearing a tablet and an expression of controlled urgency. "Sir," she addressed Morrison, "we've completed the preliminary analysis of the security breach." Her eyes flickered to Christopher with professional curiosity but no recognition. She was too young to have served during his command. "The intruder was using advanced tactics consistent with Special Forces training, but we found no match in our database for identification. However," she continued, her voice tightening slightly, "we did intercept partial communications, suggesting this was a reconnaissance mission, not an actual extraction of data. The phrase, 'confirm location of Phoenix,' was repeated twice before communications went dark." The code name landed like a physical blow to Christopher's chest. Phoenix had been his designation during classified operations, a name known only to those with the highest security clearances. Morrison dismissed the officer with a curt nod before turning back to Christopher, the professional reserve completely gone from his expression, replaced by genuine alarm. "They've been looking for you," he stated flatly, the implications clear and chilling. "Tonight wasn't a random security breach. It was a targeted operation to confirm your location. Your use of the emergency code just saved them considerable effort." Christopher was already moving toward the door, tactical planning replacing the shock that had momentarily paralyzed him. "I need a vehicle and weapons," he stated with the calm authority that had once commanded elite forces. "And I need them now." Morrison rose to his feet, once again the decisive commander rather than the betrayed friend. "You'll have them," he promised, reaching for the secure communication panel. "But you're not going alone. Whatever this is, whatever you're facing, you don't have to face it in isolation anymore."